evening and welcome. Earlier this week, on the 10th of September, we celebrated World Suicide Prevention Day. As reported by the media and FBC News, there are some surprising statistics around suicide in Fiji. So far this year, 72 people have committed suicide, as well as we've seen 66 attempted suicide cases. To discuss these issues, we have the Programs Officer of Lifeline Fiji, Ms. Biu Balai Okinawa, joining us on the show this evening. Ms. Biu, thank you for joining us. So let's talk about some of these statistics. 72 people have committed suicide in Fiji so far this year. That's the first 8 months of the year, with 66 attempted suicide cases. For the work that Lifeline Fiji has been doing over the years, can you talk about these statistics and the trend that you've seen? Is the situation getting better when you compare the stats from 2018 and 2019?
Okay, so for 2018 and 2019, our suicide cases keeps on increasing. And in 2018, we recorded 115 cases of suicide. And in 2019, we had 123. And from January to September, there's already 74 cases completed. It's a lot already, and the year has not ended yet. So yes, hopefully it doesn't go more than that. The trend is like suicide can be something that can happen as a trend. It can be an impulsive thing. So when we broadcast a case of suicide, we always expect others to follow, simply because when others are going through crisis and then they hear about suicide, that's when they, the mindset is that if that person completed suicide because of what he or she is going through, why can't I do that? So yes, there are times when if in a certain community, if one has completed suicide in that part of community, you expect, the figures in the months to follow for that to actually happen again. And if it's in a family, there's a 70% chance of another member of that family of attempting suicide because of someone who has completed suicide for that.
When you talk about trends, then you also have to talk about the fact that there's a lot of advocacy being done on suicide. I mean, even in the past few years, you look at some of the organizations in Fiji that I guess are there to assist people with, mental health issues and suicide prevention. So how do you have the right conversation around suicide if, as you say, as the point you raised, talking about it can also spark an unwanted trend? So how do you have the right conversations around suicide?
Well, sometimes when, our brains are wired in such a way that when something is being broadcast, it kind of like taps onto that part of the memory. And for those that have already thought about suicide before and is going through crisis at that time, when they hear about suicide, it's like them revisiting that negative experience or that tough moment in their life. So, how you put your words across, it can make a lot of difference on how you talk to someone who has experience or who is thinking about suicide. So you can just start by asking them on how they are doing at that moment in time. And, just start by asking that person how they are, and then you can go on from there. And there's no harm in asking about, are you thinking about harming yourself?
So just on its own, 72 cases seems like a lot for a country as small as Fiji. Yeah. When you look at, for example, the suicide cases in 2018, 115 completed suicide, 98 attempts. And in 2019, 123 completed and 121 attempts. Yeah. How worried should we be about these statistics? Does it suggest to you that it is a very serious trend in Fiji?
This is a very worrying trend, knowing that suicide is an avoidable thing. You can avoid it. simply because of the fact that there are people out there that can assist you through your difficult times. The numbers increasing every year, you know, even those numbers, I don't think that these are the correct figure that we have, because, you know, for every complete suicide that is reported, these are the reported ones. What about those that are not reported? For every one suicide that is completed, there is a chance of it having an impact on 20 other people, or 20 possibility of 20 other unreported suicide cases. And yes, it is a very worrying thing.
Stay with us. We'll be back after a short break. Let's talk about some of the work that Lifeline Fiji has been doing around suicide prevention awareness, especially given that this was Suicide Prevention Day, and this whole week was sort of commemorating the people that have fallen victims to suicide and, you know, advocating against it. So tell us about the work that Lifeline Fiji has been doing.
Okay, just to give a brief explanation of what Lifeline Fiji does, our core business is in our telephone crisis support. What we do is we intervene when we receive calls that people have ideations of or thoughts of suicide, or if they have a plan, we do our best to prevent them from acting on suicide. But if they have attempted and then they survived, we do postvention, which is like our support for the help seekers that have attempted and survived suicide. But in the unfortunate event, if a person has completed suicide, we provide support for their family on how they can cope with the loss and grieving for the loss of the loved one. Yes.
So earlier this week, Lifeline Fiji has launched a new toll number.
Yeah.
And so far, the calls that you receive and the calls that you are going to receive perhaps on this new toll number,
Yeah.
toll-free number, what sort of cases do you think are most prevalent in Fiji?
At this moment, so you know, coming towards the COVID-19 period, like the lockdown month, there was a rise and a spike in calls about domestic violence and disputes in relationships, as well as financial instability and having anxiety issues with regards to how people can cope with the pandemic. And then there were issues on dealing with when people get laid off work. So those were kind of like our main, the type of issues that we received with that. And then after that, we had those that were thinking of suicide because they couldn't deal with all the things that they are experiencing and the things that they are going through. Yeah.
So there are cases which are clearly linked to mental health.
Yes.
But I think, as reported in the news, there are also cases that are not related to mental health. And I think that you mentioned that in your answer just a while ago. So how serious is mental health as a contributor to the statistics of suicide?
It is very, very much relevant. They are really closely related. Before coming to suicide, a person has to experience thoughts of a depression stage or anxiety stage, or their mental health has to be very affected. And related to that is the stress. You know, as humans, we are designed to handle acute stress and not chronic stress. And when an individual is going through chronic stress, meaning when you're going through a stressful experience without giving a break to your body, that's when suicide comes in, yes. Yeah.
And looking at just some other statistics that have been revealed, most of the cases, almost 70% of the cases of suicide were done by people under 30.
Yeah.
And most of them were males as well.
Yeah.
So approximately 71% of the cases were male. Why do you think this is? So the young male population?
One, they have more lethal means of acting on suicide, and two, again, for the men in our country, it has been a trend, but we would like that to change. When they go through negative experience or crisis, they tend to keep it to themselves, and there's not much support services for them out there. And with that, they tend to lean towards suicide as compared to the women. Yeah.
On average, how many calls does Lifeline Fiji receive from men?
Last year, 51% of our calls were from men. Yes.
So
So it depends. It can be from one in a day when we're not so busy, and it can go right up to 10. Yes, different callers.
We'll have more for you when we come back from our break. Stay with us. Welcome back. We've been discussing some of the really worrying statistics that have been revealed for the first 8 months of this year. Most of the cases men, most of the cases people under 30. What sort of advocacy do you think should happen around suicide so that we can see a change in these trends?
People need to be made aware of the importance of having help-seeking behavior, and you know, when they are going through any sort of crisis, it's important to know the types of services that are out there, that are available to serve and to help you. Also, you know, if you see maybe a loved one or a member of your family that, you know, is going through a difficult time, please just do not hesitate to go and just be with them. Yes.
And for Lifeline Fiji, where does the work of Lifeline Fiji come in all of this? And
Okay.
if you talk about, you know, your upcoming projects and the way that you're, you know, increasing your capacity.
Yeah. Okay. So for Lifeline Fiji, we do not just limit our services to the telephone crisis. We have expanded that to community awareness as well as corporate training. This is a way that we can actually reach out to the people of Fiji and you know, equip them with tools that they can use when they are going through a crisis, such as, you know, coping mechanism or self-care tools. And with that, we also, like the two events, the event that we have on Friday, it was Suicide Prevention Day. We had our vigil. You know, this is one of the many events that we have to create awareness on the importance of mental health and having help-seeking behavior. Yeah.
And for the looking at the trends among children, so half of the cases between the ages of 18 and 45, so that's a younger age group.
Yeah.
5 of the cases were for people below the age of 17 years. So why children? How do you think it's affecting children?
You know, nowadays it's a little bit different from before, you know, because of, you know, we have a recent thing that is the cyberbullying, and then there's bullying at school. And children nowadays are a little bit different from my generation and those older. You know, the things that they go through, they are more in touch with technology, in which they can, you know, view and hear about things that they can try out. You know, for suicide in children, it comes about, you know, they can be watching a television, and then, you know, they can hear about the broadcasting of suicide, and then that could be where they can come up with their ideas. Or if they have a member of their family or someone in the community that completed suicide, so that's when these things comes, the kind of thought comes to them. And then another thing is the experiences that they go through. For some children, they can have a difficult time, not just at home. They can be bullied in school, and then there are other things that happens leading up, you know, on top of it. yeah, a lot of issues on top of each other, and then they cannot deal with it. And then if they do not have that an adult figure that they can talk to about the issues that they're going through, suicide is likely an answer for them. And for those cases, it can be when they are isolated, and if they are not understood from home, and when they have friends, and sometimes, when they are in the wrong group, again, bullied, we can say that they have this baggage that they carry with them until it is unbearable, and then they just, they're at the verge of it. Yeah.
Children, especially young teenagers, are more susceptible, more vulnerable to mental health issues. There are a number of studies worldwide that show the links between poor mental health, suicide cases, and the excessive use of social media in the younger population. Do you think that that's one of the factors here as well?
Yes. We can witness that during the lockdown period, where a lot of young people, especially teenagers, they went onto TikTok. It was just like it exploded. So not just in Fiji, the trend has been like, children or teenagers, they depend on the social media as a sort of a form of their validation, or that's where they can get their self-esteem up. And sometimes these are the very platforms that continuously they get bullied, and they are not, so their happiness is not on what they do out of social media, but depends on what others view about them. So in trying to meet up to those expectations, they can sometimes succumb to these harsh words and bullying and stuff like that. And then, yes.
We'll be back after another short break. Stay with us. Getting back into the discussion, do you think that there are cultural factors that affect your likelihood of committing suicide or attempting to commit suicide?
Yes. Take the Itoke culture, for example. There's usually this difference between the parent and the child. When we have our problems, we tend to keep it with us, and hardly ever do we ever share it with our parents. And then there are certain scenarios where children fear their parents more than talking about their problems. And when they choose to keep it to themselves and they're not able to deal with it, or sometimes they take it to their friends who may not be helpful at all times. So, that's when you start to lose out. Slowly takes a part of them away. So what we would encourage more is that if you're a parent, you spend time with your children. You need to break that barrier, because it has been an intergenerational thing where the parent is here and the child is here. This time around it has to change, because of the world is changing so fast, and for Fiji, we are going at that pace as well. So there is no proper transition of change, and these sudden changes has created that huge gap that a parent has to fill in sometimes, to create that equal level with their children in terms of understanding them, and and listening to them without judgment. You have to listen to them and make sure that you understand things as they have said it, and encourage them to speak. That way your children will be more open in conversing with you with whatever issues that they are going through. Because most of the time, comparing the generations, you can have your children that is being bullied, that has on cyberbullied or at school, that have issues with their relationship, and the parent will, won't know about it until that child or that teenager has, behaved in a way that, that the parent usually question, I did not expect my child to behave in this way.
Intergenerational differences, as well as cultural differences, I guess, especially when it comes to mental health, are important to distinguish. Let's say, for example, the statistics by the Fiji Police Force, I think it was, in the past 3 years, the number of suicide cases in the Fijians of Indian descent, is by far majority, 229 suicide cases and 222 cases of attempted suicide. Compare that for the Itoke community, it's 67 completed and 52 attempted suicides. What do you think, why do you think that that statistic is such?
The difference? I've mentioned that earlier. When a member of a family has completed suicide, there's a higher chance of other members of the family following that step. And you know, if you go back into a little back into history, it takes us back to how Lifeline was formed. It was brought over to Fiji because of the fact that the Fijian of Indian descent saw that a lot of our citizens in the Cane Belt area were attempting and completing suicide. So that already, you know, the number was back then was already high for the Fijian of Indian descent. And then, you know, generations later, the children will hear of it, how our grandpa or grandma, you know, went through these experiences. So it is etched into their mind. So when they go through a crisis, you know, the mindset will be like, if I heard this from my uncle, why don't I do it? This was the way that they went away with their problems. Why? So, and then for the Itoke, I think it has to do a little bit with, for the Itoke, it was seen as taboo. So yes, for some, and then because it was lower, for those that completed suicide, they were usually viewed in a negative light. So, you know, that could be some factors of the differences in the numbers. And another thing is the experiences that they went through. You know, in the Fiji Itoke setting, they went through things differently to our Fijian of Indian descent and their experiences. And then with that, you know, comes how they respond to that crisis idea.
We'll come back with our final segment after a short break. Welcome back. In our final segment, we want to discuss some of the wider issues that have been discussed looking at the statistics for this year. One of the main things that a lot of people were saying on social media, a lot of the media outlets were talking about, is the amount of resource allocation that does go into suicide prevention. Would you say that it's enough? I mean, looking at the statistics itself, 72 cases, 66 attempted suicide cases, and the statistics over the past 3 years from 2018, the trend is on the rise. Do you think that the resource allocation is there to match it?
No. There's always, it's not just in Fiji, it's a trend worldwide for funds allocated for suicide prevention and mental health. You know, when you compare it with other fund allocation, suicide prevention work as well as mental health is always, you know, receiving the minimum of, yes, and compared to the statistics that we have, you know, we see that there's a need for more resources to be allocated to this, to the work of suicide prevention. Yes.
I mean, as programs officer of Lifeline Fiji, and in all the advocacy work that you do, I think, what do you think is the one area that needs a lot of work and improvement?
It's on the awareness and educating the people of Fiji, as well as having a lot of people to work specifically in those areas. We are getting there, but we really need a lot more than what we have now in order to create that impact that we want to have in reaching out to our communities.
And how important do you think it is to have these, you know, structures set up from every level and in every corner of our community? For example, offering counseling and mental health services in schools, in our communities and making, I guess, mental health professionals more easily available to those who need it?
It's very, very important. Right now, when it comes to counseling, we do not have much counselors here in Fiji, and when it comes to school, for some school they may have one, or if they do have counselors, they do not go through the proper training. And the services out there's not enough. Majority of our services are here in Suva, and there's a need for more expansion into other areas in Fiji. Yeah.
So for anyone listening, just a very final question to you, Ms. Bew. If someone wanted to contact Lifeline Fiji, or if someone's out there listening who may be silently suffering, maybe in need of help, how do they contact Lifeline Fiji?
They just have to dial the digits 1543. We just launched that on Friday as well. If you see that on your phone keypad, it means One Life. And it's a toll-free number for Vodafone, Digicel, and TFL, yes.
Great. Ms. Bew, it's been a pleasure having you here talking about these really important issues. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's all we have for you on the show tonight. Thank you for joining us. Good evening.